Racism. What's that all about? Not real racism, mind you. Fantasy racism, fictional racism. The type of racism that a writer or a world builder uses to talk about these issues without really talking about these issues directly, because they're all cowards. More genuinely, it is a sort of way of using allegory and similar situations to real-life racism to express your opinions about it or showcase it for the ridiculous concept that it is, and it is possible to do that whole thing alright, and I do think you can do it well. It's just that a lot of fiction kind of just doesn't get it, where it comes from an earnest place of trying to talk about it without really understanding the concepts, for not having experienced them and not having researched them, or it's just someone who's a bad writer ham-fistedly trying to make it work when it really doesn't. There's sort of like three things that acted as catalysts for me making this video. The first being, of course, the previous video about robot rights, touching upon the subject like pretty significantly. Specifically in the case of Detroit Become Human, the game that is totally not an allegory for segregation. You guys, trust me, I'm David Cage. Ignore the fact that the second scene in the game has a black man go to the back of a bus. The game, the movie, the game. But also because this is just kind of a topic that I've thought about before. I've thought about it when working on my own writing. I've thought about it when consuming media. And when going onto the subreddit, which is one of my favorite subreddits on the internet, r/worldjerking, which is a subreddit dedicated to mocking certain writing and world-building tropes and poking fun at your own writing, and it's all kinds of fun. And this sort of topic comes up pretty frequently. It comes up pretty frequently with the question of, well, how do you handle it? Like, if you have a fantasy society with fantasy races in it, and you have racism in it, how do you handle it without seeming off, making it seem like you're just creating caricatures of real-life ethnicities? But another thing that made me really, really want to talk about this topic is that it's the question that sort of comes up in these online threads. Well, I wouldn't say often, but in certain groups, certain communities, that comes up frequently enough of, well, can you name any terrible examples of a writer trying to handle the topic of racism in this fantasy setting? And whenever that question is brought up, you bet that someone's going to bring up RWBY. Now, I am a fan of RWBY. I have been since I was a teenager, since the first trailers showed up. Monty Ohm was one of my heroes growing up. He's the reason that I really got into writing and creating my own worlds, and trying my hands at all kinds of stuff like that. RWBY is a series that is very close to me. It's a very, dear series to me, close to my heart. But I also recognize that it has many, 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 many faults. I mean, when it comes to some volumes, it's more fault than show. And yet, when it comes to this topic, I've personally felt that, sure, you can criticize the handling of this issue in RWBY, but at the same time, it is so far from being the worst and most egregious example of handling fantasy racism in fiction. For those who have no familiarity with RWBY, that's completely fine. I'll explain enough to make, some sense of it. In RWBY, you have humans, regular old people, and you have faunus, who are essentially just people with different animal features. The only thing that they're really described is that they all have one feature from some kind of animal, like kitty ears, or a monkey tail, or skin that changes color, but I think that might not have been her, thing. I think maybe were the freckles a thing? She had some kind of feature. There's also a person who's green, and I think that's a faunus. And this group has a history of being discriminated against, of slavery, of colonization, of racism, and it still continues on to that day, to the point where, while most kingdoms don't have segregation for faunus, there's still a lot of prejudice against them. And one of the first criticisms you will see towards RWBY's handling of the matter is the concept itself, which is that, of course, to make racism appealing to the... Well, I phrased that poorly. Hold on. to make the criticism of racism appealing to the masses, you need to make the subjects of that racism cute anime cat girls. Which I think is just kind of a very disingenuous way to present it. For one, it's an anime. All the characters are cute anime girls and boys, so that was always going to be kind of a moot point. It's also kind of a self-report, because the fact that they are cat girls and cat boys and dog girls and dog boys and monkey boys and whatever, the fact that you perceive that as an elevation of their, like, value as a character or their appeal as a design, well, that's a self-report in that you're saying, oh, I think a cat girl is cuter than just a girl, which is just a personal thing, really. Because in universe, it just kinda makes sense. I mean, it isn't just little ears and cute little tails. There's a whole variety of animal features you see on all kinds of character designs. More attractive, less attractive, boy, girl, grown-ass man, old person, young person, whatever. I think the only significant thing about it is that they are, well, an outgroup. They are a minority, which distinctly looks different from the baseline humans around them, the majority of humans around them, even though they are genetically entirely compatible, even though their features are like kind of a minor thing, like 99% of the time. They aren't superhumans with magical powers. Okay, they are, but everyone in the Yorubi universe is like a superhuman with magical powers and an aura that protects them from damage. That is just a thing that exists in that universe. It's everyone. That's not just the cute cat girls getting those powers. They aren't just some singular stereotype of any specific culture or nation. When it comes to like ethnicity beyond faunus, there is plenty of variety between them. And again, it just sort of makes sense in the context of the world and the way that the world has been built. Not every fantasy and fictional allegory for racism requires the subject of that racism to be a bloodthirsty ugly orc or a giant acidic murder bug from space. You know, sometimes they can just be basically a person just has like a feature that's a little bit different. What you can criticize when it comes to Ruby and this whole faunus thing isn't really like the concept itself, but probably the writing. I will defend Ruby on a lot of things. The writing aspect, not so much, because its biggest flaw is probably that it's pretty basic and boring of a plot, even though it builds itself up to be something kind of interesting, because you know, you have one of the main characters be a faunus, you have all these poor faunus being oppressed and abused and bullied, but then you have this greater organization, the White Fang, which started out as a movement just for faunus rights, and then sort of ended up being this supremacist movement, this terrorist organization, actively harming people, including harming other faunus. That's a pretty big deal, right? And that conflict had some potential to be interesting. They introduced a character called Sienna Khan, whose design was kick-ass, and she seemed to have this whole thing going on of, oh, well, maybe we need to rein this stuff in, we're still fighting for rights, and we need to balance this need for action, need for, sometimes for violence, perhaps, balance that with perceptions of us, and trying to make this whole movement actually work, and trying to maintain some level of peace and prosperity for the people that already have that. And then that whole thing gets thrown out the window because she is murdered and immediately replaced upon her introduction by the most bland, boring, edgy motherfucker in fiction, Adam Taurus, whose whole shtick is, yeah, we just need to like kill people and that'll help somehow. This is a character that is so unbelievably unserious, he is just a caricature. His motivations are outwardly, oh yeah, we need to fight for faunus rights, when really he's just upset that his girlfriend dumped him because he was too much of an edgelord. He is mocked by the people around him, including his subordinates. No one takes him seriously, and his followers use like the first, most basic opportunity to turn on him, and then he goes whoop 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 and runs off into the woods like Zoidberg. And then, before the volume where, spoilers everyone, Ruby spoilers, it's a huge spoiler about Adam Taurus. he dies. Before he dies, right? And the volume before he dies, they release this little teaser thing about, oh, this is Adam's backstory, where you see how he's like, oh, he has a rough past, he has been abused, he's suffered, and then, oh god, during his final fight, his mask comes off. Just hit my microphone. His mask comes off and reveals how he's been marked on the face, he's been scarred permanently by his abusers, by his racist, oppressive abusers. If this character was anyone other than Adam Taurus, maybe someone would give a fuck, but no one does. Because it's Adam, who cares? It's the worst character in the show. And they tried to make him, like, empathetic in the final 5 seconds of his life. It just did not really work out. Literally, the two people fighting him at the time were too gay to recognize that this was even something to note about him, and then he just, falls off a cliff and is dead. Again, I'll defend Ruby on a lot of things, not on the writing front. Or how they named the giant elephants Goliaths instead of behemoths. That was also a huge misstep, Monty, I'm sorry. Now mind you, this sort of nuanced look on racism, this sort of real-life depiction of this racism doesn't always need to, exist. It doesn't need to have, you don't need to have the prejudices in the fiction really match with anything in the real world, because those two things can be completely different. I mean, for a start, yeah, the whole robot thing, trying to match this robot movement and robot rights to real-life human rights and the past of segregation and slavery that people have in the real world actually experienced, leaves a bad taste in the mouth, right? You know, it's also similarly the case with most worlds built around D&D, like classic fantasy or Tolkien-style worlds, where most of the time you won't really see interhuman racism, you won't really see a white human and a dark-skinned human go at each other's throats because of those minor differences, because, well, you might actually be living next door to a freaking demon, like a giant demon with bat wings and horns, and it spits fire out of its mouth. And that, lowers property values, which brings in more evil summoners to the neighborhood, and they summon more demons, and it's all downhill from there. Essentially, in the world filled with orcs and dwarves and elves and ghouls and goblins and gnolls and harpies and centaurs and dinosaurs, it sort of becomes a moot point to be like, you have a different hair color and texture from me. That freaks me out. Ruby also, no one really seems to be bothered by other people's skin colors because, again, Faunus are the outgroup. They are so different from, the racist perspective from humans that's, it's starting to compare different humans becomes, pointless. It is still possible to sort of go that route and completely fuck it up. I mean, there's the movie Bright, where the line, "Fairy lives don't matter today," is genuinely and unironically uttered. And apparently, listen, I haven't seen Bright, so I'm just going off of what I've seen online, but apparently there is, a black cop character in this, and the point of that being that, because we have this world where there are orcs and fairies and goblins all around, the people don't care about race, which sounds like the point I was just making and saying, right? Except pretty ham-fisted, considering this is like a buddy cop movie. I don't know if you've seen any buddy cop movies in your life, but there is usually a black cop in there and no one cares, so this is just, you're doubling down on the default setting at that point. But there is also a way to handle these sorts of topics in a fairly interesting way, which brings me to Anbenar. Anbenar is a D&D based mod for the Paradox game Europa Universalis 4, where you have this fantasy world filled with all these wonderful magical races and very complex divided histories. It, like many things based on D&D and D&D itself, has things like half races. You can have a half human, half orc, a half human, half elf, and so on. Or maybe those are the two, now that I think about it. The point is, you have compatible biologies between these different races. sometimes. So they're obviously the same species. That's the proper use of race there in a way. But there's also, like I said, a violent, complicated history of orcish raiders, like tearing apart entire kingdoms. And you have the conflicts of the dwarves and the goblins. That one pretty much never gets resolved. They definitely just genocide each other a little bit. But it also being in this medieval setting, this medieval way of thinking, allows for some interesting depictions of how some nations in that game and some people will justify slavery of the orcs by saying, well, orcs in the past were like these violent monsters that attacked us because we were human and they were orcs, and that's what you did. You fought each other, and there was like an evil orc leader, and all that. And then they really want you to ignore the orcs that were aiding the humans and fighting for their side against those evil orcs. And then you have nations who will embrace them and make this sort of diverse, functional society. And you have the same sort of thing with them embracing even gnolls. You have people or harpies and all kinds of monstrous creatures. Except maybe like trolls, because they do eat people. The ogres also eat people. And centaurs just kill everyone they see, including other centaurs. It's not a perfect allegory for anything. I'm not gonna say it is. So there are some allegories which, they do a decent enough job. They sort of go in the right direction. But it's also possible here to have a story that is good, it's interesting, it's entertaining. But boy, if you look into it as an allegory, it sucks ass. And that is absolutely going to be Attack on Titan. I'm a pretty decent fan of Attack on Titan. I like a lot about it. I don't like Eren. I do not understand the people that like Eren, like, whatsoever. But I also know there are people out there who are trying to use Attack on Titan to explain, like, the Israel and Palestine conflict, or they're trying to explain World War II and the Holocaust. And I understand that obviously Siyama put some of that in there, or a lot of that in there, and he was going for those allegories, but I'm just saying that what if the Jews had the potential to explode upwards into a giant, nearly indestructible nuclear bomb, and then there were 1,000 of them nuking the entire planet? I think that allegory sort of like falls apart a little bit. Anyway, I've been yapping for like 25 minutes now. I don't know how much I'll cut out and then put this thing together with. Yeah, let me know in the comments your thoughts on this whole thing. Do you have any examples of terrible attempts at these racism allegories in fiction? Or maybe you have examples of really good ones. So let me know there. And one more thing, I will be doing a follow-up video on that previous one, because something wild has happened. The comments on that video have people disagreeing with me, respectfully, elaborating on their opinions, elaborating why they disagree with my opinions, and formulating those thoughts after having seen the entire video and after having considered my thoughts on the matter. That never happens on the internet, certainly not on this channel. The standard practice on this channel is I make a video elaborating on my opinions, and then someone watches 10 seconds of it, calls me a misogynist racist, and I'm left thinking, how did they figure it out that quickly? Audio. My god, I just got jump scared by this guy. There's no other audio in this pitch video except this static stabbing noise and two people